Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Leduc, and today I'm joined by Kyle Banks. Kyle is a Canadian indie developer living in Scotland, currently working on Farewell North, a beautiful, emotional, open world journey about restoring colour to the world, both metaphorically and physically. It's an incredibly heartfelt story with a carefully crafted design that immerses the player into the environment and story. Today, we're going to talk about Kyle's journey into game development, some of the challenges he's facing on his indie dev journey, and what it takes to bring more art and creativity into a medium that tends to crowd behind action and violence. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 8 of season 2 of the Zero to Play podcast. Welcome, Kyle. Thanks for joining me on the Zero to Play podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
I am very excited about this. So I stumbled upon you and your game Farewell North through a hashtag indie dev tweet. It might have been another indie dev page that retweeted one of your tweets, but I saw a short GIF of your game and immediately I was captivated. I went digging and I just fell more and more in love with your project as I learned more about it. So it's definitely a visual game in terms of the core game mechanic is about restoring color to the world. It's a beautiful narrative journey, similar to the game like Journey from that game company. In terms of the feel of it, there's minimal dialogue. It's very exploratory, and I love it because it's creative, and for me, it's projects like this that move forward gaming as a medium. So one, I really appreciate you responding to my message when I reached out and being open to having a chat today, because I do want to have more conversations like this, like we're going to have today on the show. So yeah, you're joining us all the way from Scotland, and my first question that I want to ask, I guess, it's around the core game mechanic, and I think we're going to talk about this a lot. But I love how when the world is dark, it's still beautiful, and when the world gets color restored to it, that looks stunning as well. And I think when I think about the game mechanic about restoring color, it feels like naturally in a dark world, it should be very kind of negative and sad feeling. And my question, it's kind of going very deep into it immediately, but I kind of want to hear your response. Why isn't the game sad when it's not in color?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the whole concept of making a game of restoring color to the world kind of implies that you're going to be spending the majority of the game in the uncolored version of the world, right? Because you know, just naturally, that's the way that the game is going to play. And you obviously want to put incentives for people to explore the colored version, but most of the progression of the game is going to be in the uncolored world. So it's probably the part of the game visually that I've actually spent the most time on. The actual mechanic for restoring color has that was one of the first things, but then I just spent like countless hours iterating on what the uncolored world's going to look like, because it feels so important to get that part right. So I'm working with like a really great composer who's based here in Edinburgh to try and get the mood of the uncolored world just right. I would say it probably is quite somber and like I wouldn't say necessarily depressing, but um, something along those lines. But the visuals of it still has to be like captivating, right? It still has to draw people in, both from like a marketing perspective, it has to be catchy, but also from a gameplay perspective, it has to be something that you want to be looking at. And so I've tried things that were like going as dark as say like Limbo, where it's just like black and white.
Yeah.
And I've tried things that are more, I would say more towards realism, where it's like a grayscale of the colored world. And I've just kind of been tweaking with it, just like I said, countless hours. And I'm sure I'm going to spend countless more hours tweaking it. But trying to get something that's like a stylized, visually interesting, but still kind of getting the tone across of being a depressed and sad place, because the game is kind of focused on depression and mental health and dealing with loss and all that kind of stuff. So the uncolored world is supposed to be a representation of that. So it is supposed to be sad, but I don't necessarily want it to just be like defeating and depressing all
Yeah,
the
I
time.
think I think you've done a great job. I mean, I've only seen small teaser clips and small videos here and there, but I do feel like you communicate that hopeful feeling really well. And it's, you know, it's a beautiful journey through that kind of state that there's hope for it to be better. I can't wait to play it personally, but I want to dig deeper into the inspiration behind wanting to build a game like this, because I think it does feel like it's very much uh, inspired by emotion, the story, and I think not enough game developers are exploring these emotional stories that can create some really beautiful experiences. So I'd love to talk a bit more about when the initial inspiration came for Farewell North and why this is a story that you wanted to tell, and also why in games as well, because you could have written a novel or made a film or written a song. Why was it gaming that you chose?
Yeah, so for the first part, like where the idea came from and why I wanted to tell this story specifically, I actually tried to make this game about 6 or 7 years ago. I was working on a game that was like a 2D platformer, it was like a mobile game. It was called Voiden, and it was kind of the same mechanic of like trying to bring color back to the world. I have like video footage of it somewhere, and it's clearly not. Um, it was clearly too early in my career, basically,
Mhm.
to make that game. It was too ambitious, and like I just didn't have the skill set to do it at the time. But it's an idea that kind of just stuck with me for years and years and years, obviously. And so last year, as kind of the pandemic was putting us all into lockdown, I had a lot of spare time on my hands. I was working on a game project that just wasn't really panning out. Um, I kind of came back to this idea and kind of brought it back, rethought it. It's Feral North is an entirely different game than that game was, but the central theme of bringing color back is the same, and it's just turned out much better. The original idea, I actually don't remember where that came from. It's just I've always liked stories that are like weighted by emotion. I like dark stories, whether it's like books or movies or games or anything like that. But I don't like, I don't like games that or stories that kind of just are dark for the sake of being dark. I like there to be hope and that kind of thing. And so this whole idea of restoring color and having it be a metaphor for mental health or depression or loss, that just always like resonated with me. And so it was an idea that like I tried to do a long time ago, just didn't work out. And so hopefully this time it's so far it's going much better. And so hopefully it keeps going that way. And then so why games? That's really just because that's where my skill set lies. Like I'm a software developer. That's my full-time job. I work in software. And I think as programmers, we have a really nice ability to get by in game development. Whereas like someone who comes from purely an art background or purely a music background, not that they can't do it, it's just I think from programming, becoming a technical artist, you can get by with maybe subpar art and make it beautiful. You can do things procedurally to generate content. You can do all kinds of neat things like that. And I don't think you can take those programming skills to writing a book or writing a screenplay or anything like that and necessarily have the same success. Not that you can't do it, but it just doesn't really translate as well. And so that's why. And at the same time, I've also always loved video games, right? I think they're a really interesting medium that has a lot of potential to tell like really interesting stories and kind of take the player through like a gamut of emotions in a way that a movie or book it can't quite do the same thing. Um, I don't know that we have a lot of games that have done this, but one game that was a big inspiration for me was Senua's Sacrifice, Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice by Ninja Theory. And it's a game that's very similar about like deals with themes of mental health and in a much more intense way that I think Farewell North is. But that game just like really stuck with me for a long time in ways that movies and books can't. Not that I love movies and books, but it's just I feel like games have this ability to like force the player to actually take action in situations that are uncomfortable, and I love that. And so yeah, so for me, video games are just like a huge area that's kind of unexplored for that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That's a great answer, and just the fact that it's unexplored is, and it's hugely inspiring, because you're right. There's so many different types of systems and ways of interpreting emotional feelings in a physical way through a game, through actions that don't exist yet. And it's so cool to see uh, projects like Farewell North that do it in a way that just immediately make you go, like, yeah, immediately it gives you that feeling of, oh wow, this is neat, and then it goes like deeper and deeper. um I yeah, I want to talk a bit more about gaming as a medium, and what kind of things can be created through game mechanics. Are there any other types of games that you've created that have kind of a similar mechanic that maybe interpret mental feelings in a physical way that you can talk about, or maybe past projects that you thought were a real neat game mechanic that you'd like to share?
This isn't one that I've necessarily worked on, but it's just something that came to mind as you were talking there. Is I think a really good example of how video games can do just go much deeper than like movies or books can um, is horror. So I'm a huge baby. I cannot watch horror movies. I cannot play horror games. I avoid that genre like the plague because I just will not sleep for weeks.
Yeah.
I do. But that being said, if I am forced to watch a horror movie, I can get through it. But playing a horror game is entirely different because you could have something that's just equally as scary, but with a game, you're actually forced to be the one who, opens the door or goes around that corner. And I think making the player um, a part of that experience as opposed to just a passive observer, it's much deeper.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of any other examples necessarily that I've specifically worked on, but like I said, I think it's just an area that has so much potential.
Mm-hmm.
And books, I kind of think, do this as well because you do have to keep reading, whereas with a movie, whether you're paying attention or not, it'll just keep playing in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
But games, it's like you're the one who has to open the door or walk around that corner, or you know what I mean,
Yeah.
go down the dark alley or whatever it is. And I think there's a lot of weight to that, to forcing the player to be the one to make those decisions and kind of see the consequences of that. So whether it's horror or whether it's dealing with like heavier themes or whatever it is, I just think there's a ton of potential there.
I think what's interesting about Farewell North is that you have you're playing the character of a dog named Chesley, and you have a girl companion with you. And what I think is interesting about this, and I'd love to know how you've explored this, is your as the player, you're in games, you're embodying the player when you're making these actions. But I feel like with Farewell North, because there's kind of a duo and you're kind of interacting between those two, do you feel like that takes the player out of the out of being the player in terms of the game? You're kind of watching the story unfold just because there's kind of two characters that you're engaging with. Is there any kind of thoughts you can add to that?
Yeah, of course. So this is something I've thought about a lot, like deciding to make it a game where you have two kind of protagonists
Mm.
was a very what's the right word? It was a very, like fundamental decision to the game that has big consequences. It complicates everything. If there was just the dog or just the girl, my life would be so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
But I chose to have the two characters, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So for like 90% of the game, you control the dog. There's a couple instances where you take control of the girl, where it's just something that like a dog cannot do. So there's a lot of canoeing in the game because it's basically set in like an archipelago. So there's all these different islands. You have to canoe from island to island. Obviously, there's no way for a dog to canoe, and you don't want the player to just sit there and watch a cutscene of canoeing from island to island. And it's meant to be open world, so there needs to be a way for you to get around. So in those instances, you are controlling the girl, but for the most part, on land and during like the primary gameplay, you're controlling the dog. That being said, the whole coloring mechanic is you're seeing the world through her eyes. You're controlling the dog, and the dog's job is to kind of bring happiness back into her life, and you're seeing the world through her eyes. So it's a little bit confusing from a surface level to explain that, but I think my job as the creator is to just make that clear in the game. So if just to make that obvious. The other thing is that there's like memory sequences that play a big part of the game in revealing the story and revealing what happened and why the girl is in the emotional state that she's in. And all of those memories are, of course, from the girl's life. The dog plays a part in those, but they're her memories that she's reliving. So yeah, it's an interesting, like, you control the dog, but you see the world almost through her eyes as opposed to the dog's. So yeah, it just gets a little complicated from a game design point of view in terms of like, you have to keep in mind what are both of these characters doing at any given time in any given island or sequence that you're in. Both of them have to have something to do. There has to be a meaning or a purpose for both of them to be there. It also has to be AI for the girl, so it's not like, you know, if you played like World of Warcraft or any of those kind of games, like the most annoying thing to do is to have like an NPC companion that you're trying to drag around with you. And I'm making an entire game that's based on that. So trying to make sure that that is fluid and like you're not just like banging your head waiting for the girl to catch up to you or whatever it is. So yeah, it's definitely like a very complicated addition to the game, but I think it gives the story a lot more weight than if it was just one or the other. And the way the story is going to unfold, I think, will be well worth that.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that is more complicated on paper, but when you're playing the game, it's probably a lot more intuitive, and the player can easily, accept that they're now playing the character of the girl, and but yeah, it is interesting to hear that from a game design perspective. From a story narrative perspective, did you create the story of the arc of the game on paper beforehand in a sort of script and then break that down, or did you kind of just explore the game bit by bit and memory sequence at a time as you developed the arc of the game?
Yeah, so I think the mechanics of the game were in place before the story was finalized. I always kind of knew the beginning and the end of the story. Um, like I know even today, like I know exactly how the game's going to end, but there's a lot of pieces in between the beginning and the end that are still, you know, up in the air. I know like the high level beats, but I don't know like every single step along the way. I know, yeah, I guess you could say like I know like the backbone of it, but there's going to be pieces that will kind of just fit in how they do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think like um, this isn't my concept, but it's something that has stuck with me is this idea of like the story is a lot more malleable than the mechanics. Like if you want to make a story change, it might just be, changing a line of dialogue or changing a sequence or like a level. But if you want to change a mechanic, you're changing everything, right? You have to go back and redo everything you've done because
Mm-hmm.
you might, or you have to at least review everything you've done because the new mechanic might not gel well with things. So I think it's important to get the kind of high level mechanics. Of course, you can tweak things, but get the high level mechanics in place first, and then from there work up the chain to like the more malleable things like the story that can be a little bit more adaptable to how you change things. So if you want to introduce a new mechanic, it's easier to write new story around that mechanic than it is to add a new mechanic around the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And that's, yeah, a great piece of advice as well for anyone wanting to explore this as an indie dev, to really start developing a game mechanic that is the core of the game, that is the core gameplay. You don't want to build a new core game mechanic every chapter of the game. That would just be a lot of work. Um, I, I had a thought when I was listening to you talk about the kind of length of the game. How do you know when the game is the right length? Because this is for gaming as a medium. It's not like movies where you have the traditional 2 hour long movie at a theater, or if it's a book, you have a novel that's 300 400 pages, or a song that's like 2 minutes long. Games can really range from so much, and like gaming can be broken down in a lot of ways as well. But how have you, or how do you see the length of the gameplay, and how that, like, when do you know it's going to be the right length?
That's a really good question, and I don't know that I have an answer for that. I have a lot of ideas, but um, given that I'm not done the game, it's hard to answer.
Yeah.
But I think as an indie dev, especially like a solo indie dev, you have to go for quality over quantity, right?
Mhm.
Every hour of content is months and months and months of work, and as a single person, that's it's not sustainable if you want to make a 20-hour story-driven game. But
Mhm.
it's going to take you forever. Obviously, it depends on the genre, right? Like certain genres lend themselves more to replayability or to longer or more repeatable loops. But a story-driven game, like I think Journey you mentioned earlier, is a really good parallel. The game is like 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours,
Yeah.
if you kind of really take your time and look around. And that's probably around the length that I'm going for here. I think anything longer than that, I would be worried about, you know, do I have enough content to actually make that worthwhile, make it enjoyable? Like maybe I can drag it out for 3 or 4 hours, but is that really in service of anything other than just padding the playtime? Or do I focus on just making like a 90-minute or 2 hour, like, you know, as good as I can, awesome experience? I think that's the right answer. I think a lot of Steam reviewers, like this has been going around on Twitter lately, a lot of Steam reviewers might disagree, but I think that's the right way to go. And personally, like as I get older, I'm much more interested in 1 hour games than I am in 40-hour games, just because I don't have the time to fully enjoy them. And I'm also a bit of a completionist, so I find myself like taking way too long in like the first, 10% of the game, and then I just end up never finishing it. So I'd much rather focus on building games that are 90 minutes or 2 hours long, but they're well worth that time. And you can play it in one sitting and just have like a really good experience. Maybe play it a few times over the course of a year, and enjoy it each time.
Totally, and I'm really glad that you are aware of that, and I'm glad that the Steam reviewers don't jade your perspective, because the gaming industry, especially at like a AAA level, and when investors are involved and you're trying to build a business, it's you're trying to create this loop, this constant stream of content that's being updated to the player, and that whole side of the gaming industry is a different side, and what I love is this little bubble that you're in is about the beautiful, the power of art and gaming and creating experiences that make you walk away and think about the world in a different way. And you're right, it doesn't need to be a 40-hour experience or something that's repeatable. It's just this nice little story that you can think about and experience. Are you planning on releasing any updates for the game, or are you planning on just kind of releasing it and then not forgetting about it, but just leaving it as is, as this is the work of art, and I'm not going to touch it again?
Well, so like I said, I know how the game ends, and I would have to have a pretty good reason to find a way to continue off of that. I do have actually an idea. It's really hard to go into detail about this without giving anything away, but I do have an idea about how at least not like a new game plus or anything, but like a second playthrough could be very, very different from the first playthrough, and that would be something I do. But I think the story is pretty like it has a beginning, middle, and end, and I don't think there's much of like a epilogue to that. But I do think there might be something with like a second playthrough having a different experience. Might be doable.
Yeah, that's cool. And you're planning on, I think I heard that you're planning on launching during the Steam Summer Sale. Is that still on your agenda? Is there any kind of release date that you can give for this?
No, so that was meant to be the demo. I've actually pushed that back as well. The full game won't be until 2022. I was really hoping to have it in 2021, but it's not happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the way that the Steam demos work is you're supposed to be doing the demo within 6 months of the full launch. So the idea was to do the summer festival for the demo and then launch in like the later half of 2021. But it's been delayed a little bit. So yeah, so no plans at the moment.
That's cool.
For release date. Really.
I think projects like this as well, there's when it arrives, it will be a beautiful experience that people will disconnect from the real world to just focus on this. And because of that, it can live in any time. It's not like you're pressed to get it out because it's COVID related, or because it's about this world event or this type of market. I think it lives in its own bubble of games as an art that people still talk about Journey today. Every week I hear someone talking about Journey, and it lives like someone. It could have come out last year, and it came out I think 10 years ago. It's just kind of lasted that length of time, and I think that's the power of art as well. Is just something that is rooted in feeling. It's rooted in truths about humanity and the human condition that everyone can relate to at any point in time. Is that what you're kind of aware of, and do you agree with that?
I definitely wouldn't try and say that my game's anything like Journey. Like that game is a masterpiece, and I would be honored to be like 10% of that game. But that is, Journey was a very strong inspiration on Farewell North, and that is the kind of game that I'm going for, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, I think, it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't really tie into any like current events. It's not related to like Christmas or Halloween or COVID or,
Mhm.
whatever else is going on. It is kind of like isolated in that way. And so I do think in that sense, there's no rush. And then also from a practical point of view, like I'm not doing a Kickstarter, don't have a publisher. There's no external pressure saying like the game needs to be done on this date. I have a full-time job. I'm in a financial position where I don't have to worry about making this game profitable within a certain deadline or anything like that.
Mhm.
So I can kind of take my time with it and just enjoy the process and try and make the best game I can. And so that's kind of the mindset I've adopted. Earlier on, I think just from having worked in software and always having tight deadlines, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to say like, okay, I want to have this milestone by this date. And I think I originally said I wanted the game to be released by March 2021, which is, looking back now, was not realistic at all. But I think I realized like just taking that pressure off myself and kind of enjoying the process a little bit more and taking my time to do like devlogs and that kind of thing and just kind of enjoy the game that I'm making is the better approach for me. And yeah, if people lose interest, that would be unfortunate. But it's at the end of the day, I'm making it because I enjoy making it, not because I have to make it. And I think that that's kind of the difference for me. If I was making a game because I had to, because of like financial pressure or whatever, um, I think that it would just be it would just be a whole different ballgame, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, I think I wanna hear a bit more about your process, just from an indie developer's perspective. I think a lot of people are in the same position where they're chipping away at a project, an idea that they have. It's not something that they need to make a full-time job. They've got bills are paid already, and now they're thinking of creating games in a creative way. I heard you mention about the no 0% days as kind of how you deal with motivation and that kind of self-discipline for your journey as a developer. Can you talk a little bit about that and if that's changed at all in your process for developing this game?
Yeah, so that mantra comes from another developer, David Whaley, who made a game called The First Tree, which I believe is free on Epic right now. So a
Hmm,
little plug to him.
awesome.
If you want to check it out. He did a GDC talk that is one of my favorite GDC talks, and it was um, the title of it is something like "How to Make a Game with No Time, No Budget, and No Experience," or something along those lines. It was like how to make a game with nothing. And it's pretty much his whole thing was just like just keep at it day after day after day, but literally don't have 0% days. So I kind of adapted that. And what I found that's worked for me is like I like having like a task list, and I intentionally leave things on that task list that are like 1 minute things. The kind of thing where you're just working on the game and you're like, oh, maybe I'll just change this color or something, and
Hmm.
then I'll kind of stop myself and say, no, put it on the task list, forget about it for now, because at some point you're going to have a day where you don't feel like doing anything, and you're just not going to feel like it. Any project, no matter how much you love it, you're going to have days where you don't feel motivated. Um, and so I save those tasks for those days so that I just have something that I can just like within 30 seconds or a minute just kind of cross off my task list. And what I find is like 9 out of 10 times that becomes addictive. And you're like, maybe I'll do a second one. And then you're like, well, I have half an hour, so maybe I'll do something like a smaller task. And it kind of just snowballs, and you end up, 2 hours later, you've actually gotten a few things done. And I find that has just been like a huge game changer for me, because I find in previous projects, like I'm guilty, and a lot of indie devs are guilty of this, of abandoning projects
Hmm.
for various reasons. But one of them is like you take a day off or you go on vacation for a week and you come back, and I find every day that you take off, the harder it is to get back into it, because you know the code or the project or whatever, it starts to feel like distant, and you don't remember how certain things were, or what you were in the middle of, or whatever it is. And I just find like not having a 0% day, you would think would lead to burnout, but I find it's quite the opposite. It's like you're always energized because you're always, um, you have constant motivation, a constant momentum, and you're always making progress. And just the act of like crossing something off a list is like the most satisfying feeling. And I just find it becomes addictive. So yeah, I can't take credit for that. That's all David Whaley, but it's been a huge game changer for me. And yeah, it's actually, I was just looking at I use GitHub, and they track how many, how much work you're doing every day or whatever. And I passed 365 days of like constant no 0% days. And it's kind of
Nice.
sad on one side, but on the other hand, it feels good to like have made all that progress.
Hmm. That's really really powerful. I think that's really important. I think abandoning projects as well is sometimes the right decision. I think that's just part of the creative process.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, you kind of developed the uh, color being restored mechanic for a previous project, and you wouldn't be where you are now without those past experiences. And I think it is part of the creative journey to doubt and to question and to abandon things and come back to them. And uh, did you struggle with? Well, I guess you have abandoned, like you said, a lot of projects in the beginning. Is there anything that you wish you had done differently with some of the projects that you'd worked on?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. I think there's a time and place, especially when you're learning, to just like kind of make quick prototypes, learn things, set them aside, experiment. Um, but at some point, you have to, if you want to try and make a go at this whole like indie game thing or working in the game industry whatsoever,
Hmm.
you have to finish things, right? Because people have to play them.
Yeah.
And so I think the part where it becomes a problem is like when you look back 2 years later and you're like, man, if I just kept working on that project, I'd probably be done by now. And like, you know, it's those kind of projects that become the
Hmm.
problem. The ones that kind of like haunt you. That you're like, man, I wish I just kept working on that. So I definitely have like a whole closet full of
Yeah.
those game ideas. And of course, the color restoration one was probably like the biggest one in that closet before I started working on Farewell North. Um, yeah, there's a lot of ideas of games that like I would love to pick back up one day.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think earlier on, especially when you're learning, it's super important to just like, I think in startup culture they say fail fast, and I think with
Hmm.
games I think that you have to have a similar mindset. Like your first game is not going to be the next journey or whatever.
Hmm.
So you just like kind of experiment, have fun, learn a lot, and if you can get those into people's hands, that's probably better. But if you can't, like whatever, don't let that stop you. Just keep learning.
Yeah, I used to work as a videographer. I work in production now in gaming, so I'm coming at it from like I love games and I'm trying to learn programming on the side, but I'm kind of waiting for those low code, no code tools and game engines to become more popular so that I can start expressing myself through games. But I used to work in video, and that's one of the things that I wish I did is it wasn't necessarily it was finishing a project, not only finishing a project, but just exporting what I had made and then storing that somewhere. And I think with a game, it's uh, just rendering a demo of the game that showcases the kind of work that you did, whether it's for a job application one day or it's just for when you're going through the backlog of your memories to see the kind of progress that you've made. Having like a playable demo that you can store somewhere, I think, is the equivalent of game dev, where that's something that, because you'll lose files, you'll lose project files, you'll lose assets, and you won't be able to collect that. But if you have some proof of it, that, or even if you post it online, like screenshots, like all that is really important, I feel, especially at the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, I agree. I think like I have a whole bunch of projects that are written in engines that just aren't popular anymore. So it's like I'm never going to go back and compile those and run them again because
Yeah.
I probably can't even get it working on my modern computer, that kind of thing. So getting them up on like itch or something and just like,
Hmm.
yeah, if you can make like a vertical slice or a demo, as you said, that's probably the best case scenario, right? Like you learn something, you get it out there, you get some feedback, which is important. I think the first like actually game jams are really good for this too, right? Like you just give yourself a deadline, um, force yourself to like sit at your computer for a weekend or a week or whatever, make some game with a small scope, but make it as polished as you can in that time frame. It's probably the best of both worlds.
Totally. I saw that you spoke about your wife and yourself doing a game jam game a while ago, and I wanted to, because game jams I think are underrated sometimes with uh, the general audience. Once people are in the industry, they tend to avoid game jams once they've gotten a job in the industry. So the demographic tends to be younger at game jams, but I think there's some really interesting experiences that you can learn from in your own journey. And I'd love to just hear how you thought of the last game jam that you did and what that process was like, what you learned from it.
So that's actually super timely because we just finished a game jam on Sunday.
Oh,
Like
nice.
I hosted one for a Discord community. They wanted to do one,
Cool.
and so we had a whole bunch of people make like their first games ever. So it was really cool. We had like 20 submissions, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. But the one that you're talking about, this was this game. it was just like a silly like game called But First Coffee, and it's about like an intern who has to carry all these little coffee cups and not drop them. And it's like a ridiculous little game. It was made in 48 hours or something. It's terrible. Don't play it. But it was a lot of fun to make. And my wife, because it was I think it was our anniversary that weekend, and so as compensation for letting me do this game jam, we did it together, and she did all the music and everything for it.
That's so cool.
And like a lot of like the artwork and stuff like that, and that kind of thing. And it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I think game jams are just a good time to like kind of let loose and do something weird and do something that you wouldn't normally do, and definitely wouldn't be something you would do for like commercial purposes, and just like experiment, and of course try and go to your comfort zone, not just in terms of like the game that you're making, but also like technically or artistically or whatever, to try and learn some new things. So that game, it was, yeah, just trying to make something like silly and goofy and funny, and do it with my wife, and it was a lot of fun. And the one that I just did this last week was, I made this little game that was again kind of silly, with an astronaut who's like stranded on a planet, and there's asteroids coming, and he tries to grow a massive sunflower to climb away. And so you're running around with like a sunflower in a pot trying to grow it and climb off this planet, and it makes no sense, but it's just game jams are game jams, right? Like do something weird and have fun with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're like a good palate cleanser, I think. And actually, interestingly enough, the previous one, I was mentioning earlier how I was working on a project that just wasn't really going anywhere, and then I ended up remembering this old game idea. That game jam was kind of what triggered that. So I was kind of like hitting a roadblock with this project, and I saw that there was a big game jam coming up, and it was like 48 hours. So I was like, I'm just gonna take this weekend. I'm gonna kind of like think about something else, but keep doing some game dev because I don't want to give up my 0% days. And then on Monday, I'll decide, I'll just get back to it, or I'll say this project isn't going anywhere. But I don't want to make like a snap decision. I want to like take my time and think about this. So I did the game jam, and I came back on Monday, and I realized like that project just wasn't going anywhere. So that's what kind of led to Feral North starting up. So
that's cool. I think it's really interesting, and it's cool that while you're working on Feral North, you're able to pause that and think of a completely new concept and explore, a completely different area of gaming that's not related to this project that you've been in development for over a year. And I think when it comes to online personas and brands, you kind of focus on, when people think of Carl Banks, they might think of Feral North, but I think it's really cool that you're able to break that and see your own personal journey and what is important to you, and you making a new game is important for you to further your skills, and you don't need to be kind of pigeonholed in just Feral North, and that's the only thing you need to be developing. And I think that's a really mature thing to see in your current journey.
So I can't say I was totally mature about it, because I did work on Feral North every day during that week, just for a few minutes. So I took that week to like do like the credits menu, because I was like, it's something I can just do for like 5-10 minutes every day, not have to put a lot of thought into it, and keep my motivation. Because I like, the worst thing that could happen now would be for me to like lose motivation on the project and stop working on it. So it keeps me up at night, the fear of that happening. So I didn't want to like take a week off and then forget everything about Feral North. So yeah, so worked on a little bit. So not the most mature, but it was like a good palate cleanser and a good chance to like decompress a little bit and not stress so much about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're here today. You're still motivated, and you stayed consistent, and I think that's important as well. Everyone's got their own journey with how the perspective of their projects, and it's probably you've probably known from your abandoned projects in the past. You don't want to lose this, and that's how much you care about this coming out right. And yeah, I think that's the right energy to have, the right motivation to have for a project like this. I want to talk a bit more about how you first started learning software, what your first, because I want to know if you had the intent of indie developing and developing games at the very beginning of your software development journey. What did that look like?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I knew like a tiny little bit of HTML, but I didn't do any programming courses or anything. But my best friend Kevin, he was like a pretty skilled programmer, and he still is, of course. But we would do this. I don't know why he agreed to this, but I would basically like dictate some game idea and he would like code it and it would sit in his room and he would just like code and I'd be like having ideas and stuff like that. And we making the game together. It's not like I was telling him what to do or anything, but anyways, so I always like wanted to make games, but I didn't know how to do it. And then in college, I was actually going to school to be an accountant, which I'm so glad I didn't end up doing. Not because there's anything wrong with accountants, but it's just I would not have been happy today.
Mhm.
But anyways, we were living together in college, and we were really into World of Warcraft at the time, and we both worked part time and whatever. And anyways, I woke up one morning, I was on World of Warcraft, and I saw that he was online, and I was like messaging him, even though he was in the next room. I was like messaging him in the game. He wasn't responding, and I went over, and he wasn't there, but his computer was just like playing the game on his own because he had written this program. I didn't realize to like it would basically like monitor the screen and it would monitor his health bar and it would like run around and basically farm X. I can't remember what it was doing. Anyway, that moment I was like, I'm dropping out of accounting. Like this is what I want to do because that's so cool. So basically, I just wanted to make World of Warcraft cheat mods or something.
Yeah.
And that's why I got into programming. But anyway, so I ended up. I dropped out of school, convinced my parents it wasn't a terrible idea, and they agreed to fund me going back to school to become a programmer. And that was like the best decision I ever made. And I was really into like startup culture and stuff. I wanted to move to like San Francisco and work in big tech and everything. So games, they didn't take a backseat. Like I did a lot of my school projects were like little HTML games and stuff like that, but that wasn't really like the goal. But it didn't really come until later when I realized that it was actually possible for like a normal programmer. Like you didn't have to be like a super math genius or anything like that to make games. Like a general programmer can get by. And nowadays even non-programmers. But I think like I had this preconception that you had to be like, you know, you have to have like a math degree to get by in gaming, which is just not the case. So yeah, it was like a weird windy road, but I definitely did always want to make games. I just didn't really think it was like an option.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that you have that moment that you kind of made that realization of, you know, the potential of what learning programming could give you in the world, and seeing that it's related to games and making that connection. Did you find that the mindset of programming when you first started your course was something you needed to learn, or did it come quite naturally to you, you know, learning programming as if it was, you know, a new language?
So that's the thing. Like it clicked with for me right away. It was like second nature. Obviously, there was like a learning curve, but prior to that point, like I was not a good student. I was never really interested in school. I didn't put much effort in. I did well in like math class. That was like my one thing to boost my grade because I could kind of get by in math without too much effort. Math and physics were like my thing, but like English class or any of the other ones where you had to put in a lot more effort. Or at least for me, I had to put in a lot more effort. I didn't do that, so I didn't really have good grades or anything like that. Accounting was kind of the same thing. I just wasn't into it, and it didn't really it like reflected on my grades. But programming, it was like immediately my grades were like amazing because I was just so obsessed and like I was going above and beyond and like I just wanted to learn every single thing I could. So it was like asking the professors to teach me things that were not in the course material. I was constantly reading different books and stuff like that, trying to like push what I could learn. And ended up graduating with like high honors for the first time in my life. And when I say I was a bad student, I mean I was like 50s and 60s in all through high school and all through like accounting because I just didn't.
Wow.
I just wasn't into it. But programming like really clicked right away, and it was like, yeah. So I was saying that's like the best decision I ever made. And like I love being a software developer. Like I really enjoy my career, and that's why I continue to be a software developer. I'm not really trying to get into like the games industry because I really do enjoy it. It's kind of like it's my professional work and it's also my hobby. So yeah, that was a huge thing for me. It was like discovering that.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think that's really inspiring, just to hear, you know, just how your journey's evolved. That's how long ago was that when you studied programming?
About 10 years ago now.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited to see how your journey continues to evolve once the demo gets released, once the full game gets released of Fairwell North, and what ideas you think of next. I'm excited to see the reception of it. I'm excited to see, yeah, just where this takes you, because it's people like you in the gaming industry that I think I mean, I don't know how big the team was behind a project like Journey, but what I love is that gaming is maturing as an industry as a whole, where solo developers are able to tell stories in unique and creative ways. And I think that's really powerful and important for the industry to kind of grow and to inspire young people to tell those really big stories uh, later on in life. I I want to know, is there any other indie developer that you are really inspired by, or just any developer in general that you think has the right mindset when it comes to developing games and um, building games in the industry?
Oh man, there's so many. Trying to think. um, yeah, like I have a ton of friends who are I met through indie dev communities and stuff like that. So I feel weird singling one person out.
Fair
But I will
enough.
say, a friend of mine just released a game recently. It's a game called In My Shadow. Came out I think 2 weeks ago on Steam. And it's a really cool platforming game based on shadows, and it's kind of like, as is similar moods of like dealing with depression and loss and everything. So there's a lot of parallels, and he's a really good guy. Um, and this game is a cool platformer where you're basically moving objects through the room, and then the shadows of those objects are the game world that you're actually playing on. So it's like a 3D room, but you're playing on a 2D surface, which is the shadows on the wall. It's a really cool idea,
Cool.
and it's really beautifully done. And yeah, that's a game that's really inspired me. And he's always been about like a year ahead of me in terms of like the progress on his game. So we chat a lot, and it's just been a lot. It's been great to like pick his brain and see how he's going through releasing his first game. And um, yeah. So his name is Knuckle, but he's like Playbay on all social media, and the
Mhm.
game's In My Shadow. It's a really cool game.
Cool. No, thanks for doing that shout out. And I want to end the podcast by really plugging you. So anyone who's interested in following Kyle, you can follow him on Twitter at Kyle W Banks, where he posts his dev vlogs and updates on Farewell North. You can wishlist Farewell North on Steam at the moment. There's also a private Discord, I believe, and that's where uh, more behind the scenes information is being released if you're interested in following the project at a more deeper level. Is there anything else that you'd like to highlight for people listening that might be interested in hearing more about your story and what you're doing?
Yeah, come chat to me on Twitter, which yeah, you said the tag there. That's probably the best place, and have links to everything else there. And not just me, but any indie developer, maybe wishlist their game on Steam. It helps us a ton. So um, yeah.
Awesome. No, I love it. Thank you for representing the indie dev community. Thank you for just believing in your project and wanting to tell this heartfelt story. I can't wait to play it and let it inspire me with my experiences, and I'm sure it will lead to kind of the next stage of the gaming industry and the maturity of it to become more, to see more projects like Journey being made at a bigger scale from bigger projects. I look forward to that kind of vision of gaming in the future. So thank you for giving your time and sharing your story. All the best with Farewell North, and yeah, have a great rest of your day over in Edinburgh and Edinburgh and Scotland.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Thanks. Take care.